Welcome to everybody who is here now, and welcome to everybody who is watching online. How to make art when the world is burning is the title of this series of artists' talks, and as well as seminar led by Klaus Speidel at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna, as some of you know. And before I hand over the microphone to Klaus, who will moderate the evening and introduce his guest, just two technical informations. One is there's a live stream, and if you later, if there for questions or commentaries, if you speak into the microphone, your voice will be on the stream, not your picture, because the camera is here. Just to let you know, and of course, if you don't want that, you can speak without microphone. And the other thing is, if you'd like to receive our newsletter it's a weekly newsletter with the events of the upcoming week and many very interesting evenings. You can sign for the newsletter if you are interested. So I'm very much looking forward to tonight's talk. A very warm welcome to Gloria Benedikt. And I'll hand over the microphone to Klaus and wish us all an inspiring evening.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting this series, How to Make Art When the World is Burning. It's a question I've been asking myself for a while, being active in the art world myself. And this year I launched a seminar at the Angewandte with a similar name, and immediately thought that it would be great not only to look at historical artists who had made art when their world was burning, people like Goya, who drew the disasters of war, or people like Grosch, who drew the Nazis while they were rising in Germany and so on. So look at historical examples, but also look at contemporary artists and invite them to have a conversation to see what are the issues of today and how they are trying to address them. We had a first talk in November with Oliver Ressler. The talk is still online. It was also recorded. And the second person I thought of immediately was Gloria Benedikt, who is a stage director and researcher. So not artistic researcher, but also scientific researcher. She graduated from the Vienna State Opera Ballet Academy, the English National Ballet School, and Harvard University, which is the unexpected one in the list. Not another art academy, but Harvard. In 2015, she joined the National Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, the IASA, to explore how partnerships between scientists and artists can support the transformation towards sustainability, which is the topic that has been her focus, at least since then, and we'll learn if already earlier. She's the lead author of Science and Art for Life's Sake. That's how I discovered your work, a study that you can also find online as a PDF that's really around the relationship between science and art and the possibility to communicate scientific results with artistic means. In 2021, she was at the Institute for Human Sciences as a visiting fellows and explored how to harness the power of collective experience through performing arts to support transformation in society. I just said that you have an interest in looking at how to transmit science in different ways to the audience, based on the observation that there's a lot of scientific research that we know positively to predict our future if we don't change, and yet there's little reaction. And an article, I asked you for an article that we could read with the students beforehand, and article you shared is called Theater for Future, a New Paradigm for a More Sustainable Existence, in the journal The Drama Review at Cambridge University Press. And in this article there was one passage which I'd like to quote at this beginning, where you say more active stimulation by art institutions and universities may be needed. It could take the form of laboratories where artists can exchange with peers who have succeeded in such work and have the possibility to connect to scientists who seek to advocate beyond traditional institutional structures. And in a certain sense, of course, the idea of this lecture series or conversation series, as well as the seminar, is to actually try and do that and and give artists who have been working in this direction a chance to speak to art makers, but also the general audience. And in a way, I thought today that it's also thought of as a bit of a masterclass. So trying to figure out what were ways that you dealt with some of the challenges, what were the challenges you had to deal with and have to deal with in your work, but also what are the strategies you have to overcome them, and what are the artistic strategies that you're using. But to start, I'd really start to focus on this question of climate change. When did you decide that was the main issue you wanted to focus on? And is it correct to say that? But
yeah, I mean, hello, good evening. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and contribute to your fantastic series. Yeah, so I prefer to use the term ecological crisis now for various reasons. One being that climate already, when you say climate, you already lose a lot of people. It's become polarized, but even more importantly, ecological crisis includes biodiversity loss, which is not included in the climate crisis by itself. And yeah, it takes a broader view. But yeah, beyond terminology, when I became interested, so I do remember that day very distinctly. It was in 2008. I was just fresh on campus, and Al Gore came. And this was 2008. And he said, "We need all hands on deck." And then I mean, that's when I really started to grasp. I didn't grasp it that day. The existential challenge that we face, and yeah, that was the day when I thought, okay, what can I do? And at that point in 2008, it was not the most logical question for an artist, of course, to ask it. If you wanted to contribute or tackle this crisis, you became a scientist. Yeah, but that was how I got inspired. It took me many more years. I had to finish university first, so that was 2013. And at that point, I was in the theater world for a long time. I got a little bit frustrated because somehow at university I was, you know, we were discussing the climate crisis and, I don't know, women's rights in Afghanistan, for instance, and then I would go across the street into the theater and we were discussing who is going to be the Snow Queen in the Nutcracker. And somehow I was like, why can't we, I started to think, why can't we tell stories about now? Of course, now in retrospect, I realized that this is like every generation of artists, many artists in every generation start asking that question. But that's how it started. Yeah.
Do you have the feeling that this question was particularly pressing or maybe surprising in the world in which you were? I mean, State Ballet, it's not the most obvious place. We often speak about the fact that contemporary art, you know, there was the Biennial for Change. Is much more going on, and yeah,
yeah, I mean, of course, coming out of the traditional art world, it doesn't get more conservative than the state opera. One would think this is not the obvious place, but I would disagree, because I think that the stories that we're telling in the opera house and so on, they are always about the human condition in the end. So, I mean, last year, just to mention, there was a great work at the Volksoper called Kaiser Requiem, and it really went, it didn't go into the climate crisis, but in very fundamental questions that are very relevant right now. So I always felt that the classical arts can play a fundamental role in this transition as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can look at one trailer. You have performed and will perform again a piece in Vienna in January. I think there are also flyers somewhere for those who...
when you go out.
What will be the public premiere?
So it will be so it premiered last October.
Oh, yes.
And it's coming back now with a whole series of performances for schools, and also a public performance on the 29th of January. So.
Okay, 29th. And we can see a trailer because it's always interesting to see a little bit what the art looks and feels like, even if it's only through a trailer before we continue the more conceptual discussion. Maybe the beamer, maybe Meto, I have to stop because the beamer switched itself
there we
off.
Go.
There we go. Just go back to the beginning if you can. And make sure the sound is coming through the speakers if possible. I guess they don't see the same image as we do. Therefore, it's hard to get the cursor where we all felt it should go right now. Like, why don't you click? Well, because that's not what they see over there. If not, shall we continue a bit, or until maybe then Meto can find a way to make it work, or? Well, that are the limits of technology. That doesn't happen at the ballet. I mean, unless there's technology involved, potentially. But the human body is still a more reliable tool than the video projector. There was a tech check, I can confirm, but somehow.
We still have plenty to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, maybe one thing that I would be interested in, because I know you have a relatively intense relationship also to scientists, and you didn't feel like you could now just go and talk about climate change because everybody already knows what's going on. You felt, is that correct to say you felt the need to go to talk to the scientists and to keep working with them, or how did that come about, going to IASA and so on?
So actually, initially I was in the arts world and I wanted to work on the ecological crisis, and there actually, we are talking 12 years ago, the arts world didn't understand why I would want to do that, at least the arts world I was in. So I remember being at a panel, and somehow I said that I'd love to tackle this challenge. And then the director of IASA was in the audience and basically said, well, then come and join us. And that's how I ended up in a scientific institute, because the scientists were very interested to see if someone else could come in, because they had been saying the same thing for 40 years. And the message didn't come across very well. So that's how it started. But I really started from zero. I mean, I didn't even understand why the message wasn't coming across. And then what I learned was that, so Science can tell us why something is happening, right? I mean, why global temperature rise is there, that's pure physics. That there are not enough, that the resources on this planet are limited. Science can explain that. And also why sea level is rising and so on. But art can translate these findings into what that means for the human condition. Yeah. What does it mean when 100 million people get displaced because of the sea level rise? Like, we can tell that story, and we also have scientific data, again, that our brains are wired for stories and not for facts. So for thousands of years, we've been telling stories, and this is what we respond to. I mean, if you start reading a book, you have 2 sentences, and immediately there is something, and you want to know more, right? So in a way, I realized it took me some time that for 40 years we had been speaking a language that actually, the language of facts, which is actually not the language that we are wired for. And therefore, that's why I then became so passionate about telling good stories about the future. Yeah.
So, so storytelling for you is kind of the essential means, and something art has been doing for millennia, most likely, to convey these things. There's an argument even by Jérôme Brunner, a cognitive psychologist, who says that there are 2 modes of understanding the world. One is the argumentative mode, and the other is the narrative mode, which mostly seems maybe counterintuitive at first to a lot of people, because you think that storytelling is for entertainment and so on. But of course, there's research that shows that people even understand themselves through stories first. Children at the age of 2, 2.5 tell themselves stories about their own self, even before they start telling stories to others. So there's a deep connection between identity and storytelling. And of course, it's a traditional way to transmit knowledge. I mean, Aristotle already talks about that in his Poetics, and says, you know, we read stories to understand what everything is. So really there's the idea that there's a cognitive function, a learning function, a knowledge function of storytelling that maybe connects, and that's, I think, the argument you're making, connects more deeply to human yearning and possibly motivation, because I think that's a key idea.
It's very, it's great that you're pointing out that Aristotle actually already said it, right? So I think what happened in between is that the Enlightenment happened, and it was based on this idea that if we know enough, we can change the world, and all our institutions have now been built around this idea, and the hope was that if scientists can explain to us what is happening, then we are going to do the right thing and we're going to change course. But actually, I think, yeah, the Enlightenment is still incomplete because we don't have the arts in it. Of course, we need the knowledge and we need the scientific insight, but it's not the only thing. We need the other one, the transformation into what it means for the human condition. I specifically don't say translation, because that would be, it's more complicated than just translating. Like, yeah.
And so the works you would say that are needed are works that evoke a certain future, a certain present, both? And if yes, what future? Is it the negative future? Is it the positive future? Is it both? Is it the hope? Utopia, dystopia?
I mean, you can tell many stories. If you're asking me what would be a good story to tell, so the Hollywood happy end story where technology will save us would be nice, but it's not realistic. That's the science, partially there are sci-fi stories like that. And of course,
I mean, there are people telling this story right now in the Silicon Valley,
exactly,
who run open, not so open AI companies and so on and so forth.
Yes, actually, if since you're mentioning the tech bros, it's actually very interesting to see also what the power of story can do there. So if you're listening to where they take inspiration from, they all quote Ayn Rand, the Fountainhead, and they also, if we look at Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, they see themselves as contemporary Noahs. So Peter Thiel has his prepper house in New Zealand, and he thinks that he will survive the apocalypse and the new species will rise. So he's like Noah, right? And Elon Musk thinks he's gonna go to Mars and have his new civilization there. So these stories are powerful, and they do shape how people see the world and the decisions they make. I mean, it's actually, yeah, good, but not so good example of what stories can do. If we go to the good stories, the apocalypse is also not going to help us. So the good story, I call it, is a constructive story that is based on a scientific facts and then helps us think ourselves out of this crisis. And these stories have emerged in the last 5 years. In literature, for instance, you have The Ministry for the Future and then The Deluge, which are stories that are set around this time and go into 2045, 2050, and really think about how can we get ourselves out of this, and they are very well researched. So that, in short, a constructive story for me would be one that is realistic, but at the same time inspires tangible hope. So, yeah.
It's working?
Yes. But the beamer?
Now we don't have an image. Maybe, yeah. Ah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So now we can watch one of, not the story you're telling, but a very short trailer of one of the stories you are telling. Okay, thank you, Mette.
Can you go back?
Diesen Brief zu schreiben und Ihnen vielleicht ein wenig zu helfen.
Wir sind, was Sie die zukünftige Generation nennen. Wir werden 2050 geboren. Nun sind wir 25 Jahre alt. Wir schreiben also das Jahr 2075.
Wir würden gerne verstehen, wie die Menschen so 2025 gedacht haben. Was ihnen wichtig war. Was sie verstanden und was sie getan haben. Was sie gefürchtet, gehofft und wovon sie geträumt haben.
Wir haben ja schon alles gewusst, die Klimawissenschaft hat uns schon lange gesagt, wie es steht, was wir brauchen, um umzusteuern, aber getan haben wir es trotzdem nicht.
Wir sind viele, können aber wenig für euch tun. Viel können wenige für euch tun.
Was machen wir jetzt mit dem Redefine?
Wir kommen demnächst nach Wien, weil uns eine große Frage umtreibt. Warum leben wir in dieser Welt jetzt, so wie wir leben?
Wir würden uns daher sehr freuen, wenn Sie ins Odeon-Theater kommen und uns dabei helfen.
Thank you, Mette. Yes, so it's, as you maybe understood, a kind of docu-fiction because they're real scientists speaking as themselves, talking about their vision of things, about their experiences, but then there's also this fiction of these young people that were born in 2050 coming to ask us. And how did you develop this and what's the idea?
So, I mean, one of the reasons why it's so hard to create work on this ecological crisis, at least for, I would say, in the performing arts, and I think also in literature, is that it's difficult to find a good form, right? Because the story is new. For the last 80 years, it's for the first time that we are so powerful we could get rid of ourselves. This has never happened before. And how do you tell that? And what would be, I mean, should it be a drama or a tragedy or a comedy? Maybe not. In literature, they now have found a genre which is called climate fiction, which I mentioned before. And in theater, so one form that I found, which is here, is documentary theater. So you have this basic plot where they are coming from the future and they're trying to understand what they said, like what did we know, what did we do, what were we dreaming of, what were we scared of. But sort of the goal is to understand where we are as a society. And there are these characters coming from the future, but then there are also people from the real world who are themselves as ambassadors. And over the course of the evening, then you get an idea, and there's a plot, but there's also a lot of documentary elements because we have these real characters who are telling them what's happening.
And I don't know how much I'm allowed to reveal as I was there at the premiere, but one important aspect is also an interactive element, which was really important to me when I wouldn't say saw it, but experienced it, participated in it, because you get to know what other people think around you. And was that something you experimented for the first time with this work? And how did you come to think that this form of interactivity was something valuable?
So actually I started doing interactive elements at YASA because YASA develops, some scientists at YASA develop interactive, so simulation games for policymakers. And then I started working with some of them, and then we started to put art and interactive games together. But I would say that the work I did at YASA, it was a little bit, the interaction was a little bit killing the aesthetics, and that had to do with the fact that I was working at YASA. It wasn't, in retrospect, I found that these first works were, the breaks in between when we asked people what they were doing and they formed groups, it was kind of breaking a little bit the story. So this one, I tried to do it in a more artistic way. But maybe before I explain how I did the interaction part, maybe I should also say why I made the piece. Yeah, so actually it started with a study from Yale University which said that 2/3 of people are not talking about the climate crisis. And I thought that's really strange. I mean, this is happening. We're feeling it every day. I think everyone here in the room can remember things that were still there when you were a child and now they don't exist anymore. And then we're not talking about it. And somehow, as a society, not everyone, but collectively as a society, we just seem to accept that things are going away now and we're losing things. And it doesn't have to be this way, right? I mean, there's something we could do about it. And then I thought about the fact that when we lose people, we have a mechanism, and that is the same around in all different civilizations of the world. We have funerals in one way or another, but it's always the same thing. People come together, they mourn together, and that is really important to acknowledge that loss in order to actually then move forward, and move into the future again. And then I thought, for the climate crisis, we don't have any kind of ritual. So maybe I can create a work, and this is kind of what became Act 1, where we come together and we acknowledge what we have lost already. So that's how Act 1 happened, and the first question happens. And so there comes in the interactive part, that there are little cards in 4 different colors on the seats, and then the future generation asks in the first act, so what do you already miss? And then people start writing their answers, and then baskets are put around like in the church, but instead of putting money, you put your answer, and then it's handed forward, and then 25 questions are being drawn, and then you can kind of hear, I mean, totally blindly, but you can then hear a little bit about that. And somehow, and then in the second act, there's a second question where it's about how, like, what do you want to get rid of, right? And then in the third act, it's about how, what's important to you, what do you hope that we in 2075 still have. So there's a lot of plot happening that I'm not going to give away, but sort of this was, developing these questions was for me a way to maybe help bring a conversation that I think is missing, that I think if we don't think about what's important to us and what we hope that people will still have in 2075, then how are we going to go there? So in a way, yeah, I tried to create a format that fills in a gap that I think is there. Yeah.
One aspect I find interesting, I have looked a little bit into questions of course you're talking about a certain sort of efficiency, right? Hoping that you can change things and motivate people to bring about change. And I think in art we are often very wary or skeptical or afraid of claiming our ability and the need to bring about change. You can't dwell quite as much in ambiguity if you want to bring across points and so on. And I had looked at studies on virality. There's a guy called Jonah Berger who's a marketing professor at Wharton Business School, and I have the feeling, and that's my personal opinion, that if we want to counter the power that is put behind the denial of these things happening, we have to have weapons that are at least as sharp, Robert Faller might say, as glänzend, as shiny as well, as the weapons that are mobilized by the other people in front of us. And so he has this whole system where they looked at what went viral and why, and it's called steps, and story is the last one, but one of them is also publicity. And the realization for this one, and the example for this one is about binge drinking in American campuses, that people get dead drunk when they're 21 or younger, and that at the same time this happens and people have problems and so on. At the same time, most students, when you ask them privately, don't like binge drinking. And so they were like, okay, so we need to find a way to make public the fact that there is already agreement against binge drinking. And so that's the example they use. So publicity is one, and I would say, I don't know if it was conscious or unconscious, but in any case, that's something that was very important to me, to be in a group where different people made public what they don't speak about, and what you have rarely the opportunity to see. So suddenly you have the feeling that there is possibly a critical mass with you in the room that you didn't know about, because, and that they're missing similar things and so on and so forth. And I mean, there are other principles that I find interesting in there, but I won't go into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you experience it like that. For me, I mean, it's not that I made this piece and I want people to walk out with a certain opinion. That's not my job. Then I would be an activist, which I'm not. So I'm just trying to create a format that makes some things visible, right? And so that to empower people to have these reflections and think about these very deep value questions. And maybe that really helps to also hear the others, what they say. But I think that's, so for me, it was really just, for me, it's so important to pick up the ball from the scientists and try to make what they found tangible. Yeah.
This, I had asked the students to send me questions before, and I think one question that's interesting in this context is, of course, you said that at IASA, the kind of setting of a workshop and so on wasn't conducive to the kind of thing you wanted to convey, and here you create this very ritualistic ambience. So
because so here, I mean, the music never stops. At some point the questions come and then people have 2-3 minutes to think about their answers and write them down, and then they're being collected. But because there's music playing, it feels more like, it's almost like, well, not ritual, but almost like a bit like a meditation. But because the music keeps playing and there is this handing over of the baskets and people put it in, it didn't kill the aesthetics the artistic aesthetics, and I know it because the technician, right, who sees a new production every day, he said to me after, he's like, well, when I saw interactive, I was very skeptical because this thing always kills the art, but this time it worked. And I was like, okay, this is a technician. Oftentimes, they see everything, right? They don't come to the theater once. So I'm always very interested, and he's just said it, I didn't ask. I'm always very interested in hearing the technician's opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really an interesting question around interactivity and what's interactivity that works and why. And I mean, that would be a whole different debate and maybe a bit more specialized. But I think one thing that I feel works if it's not a gadget. It's not like there's this one spot and you say your word and now we move on, right? So when it's taken, when you feel that it's actually necessary for what's happening, that there's actual insights, that it moves the plot forward and all of these things, rather than you having this little, you can push the red button to see the next scene kind of function. So that's something that's definitely there. But
and actually, the cards really matter. So my plan is to actually give all the cards, and now we will collect many more, to a museum in Vienna, with the request to actually make an exhibition in 2075 and really put all these cards out for people to see what we were thinking in 2025. And for me, I mean, I'll be 93, so chances are I might not get to, pretty good that I won't see it, but for me it's very important to think that long term. I think that's when the project will be complete, when there will be this exhibition and yeah.
But I wanted to ask one of the questions. Sahra asked it, and I thought I could have you ask them yourself, but you wrote them so nicely, and I don't want to put you on the spot by now, having to recite the right question at the right moment. So I'll just ask it for you. In practice, so Sahra writes, in your writings you highlight the importance of rituals, interactive formats, and collective engagement in shifting behavior. That's the thesis of this article, which I quoted before, and you put it in practice in this work. Have you, in practice, have you witnessed an artistic project that genuinely changed the audience's mindset or inspired concrete action? And how do you assess or measure such impact?
Okay, so an artwork that inspired me, I have to say at the moment, I get most inspiration from literature, because somehow around 2020 the ice broke there, and now there's really very good climate fiction coming out. So if we can, we could put up the slide if it's not too difficult, otherwise but yeah, so there's one book called The Deluge, for instance, that goes from 2013 to 2043. And it's told through 7 characters. Of course, there's the activist and the scientist, but there are also the characters who really don't care. They're just successful in their job and they really don't give a damn. And they are also portrayed not in the evil way, but they are also people. I mean, there is this element in, and the struggle we are going to have for the next decades, I mean, it's not like 2030, the Agenda 2030 will be implemented and we will live happily ever after. So we will continue this struggle probably for the rest of our lives. And this novel made me get at peace with that prospect also. It's going to continue. And generations before us had other struggles, right? I mean, it's just something we're not going to solve overnight. We happen to be on this planet right in this moment. We do what we can, and we hand it over to the best generation in the best way we can. But in the end, it depends that we can say we did the best we could. And this is something that really, helped me, and I admired the quality of the writing, of course.
So that would be like your personal experience of one of these works, because
so far nothing in theater, to be honest, has moved me as much as a bunch of books, especially The Deluge, but there are a few others. So at the moment, I think literature is very strong.
And this question of assessing or measuring such impact, I mean, we got into it a little bit in the pre-discussion. It's always hard not to have the discussion at the pre-discussion, where we briefly discussed the question of whether it's useful and necessary, and can you measure change and impact, and should you try to measure it, or should we be content with anecdotal evidence, as a scientist might call it, that you have had people that talk to you about what they felt? I mean, I can tell you that I had thoughts that I hadn't had before in this kind of ambience that you created. Yeah.
So, I mean, personally, for me, the nicest compliment is if people say, I walked out differently than I came in, then I think I achieved something. Of course, I'm also very happy if people cry, which also sometimes happens. Because
I cried.
Yeah, because then you really go deep, right? And so yeah, I sometimes watch a movie and I cry and I think about it for 3 days, and you know, this. I think that's one thing. You could go and measure and try to do studies and like say, how did people think before, how did people think after, but in the end this will never be accurate, because you don't know if your parents' house got flooded 2 weeks ago and then you see the performance and then something clicks and suddenly, or afterwards a storm happens. Like this, I think this is, it's a nice exercise, one could try to figure it out, but I don't think that we'll ever know this. But what we do know is that stories have changed the course of history, and we have data on that. So, yeah, as I mentioned before, we can even see it with the tech bros in a not so positive way, but we also have, yeah, there's a book called The Written World, how stories have changed the course of human civilization and history, that goes through thousands of years of stories and how this has changed people's worldviews. So this evidence we have, and I think it is more helpful to work with that. And of course, what is not going to happen, the one great movie, the one great book, and the one great theater play which will change the course of history. Like, as 40 years of studies haven't changed the course of history. What can, if it's constant, yeah, if it's always around us, if the stories we're telling on the different art forms that we have, if that is present, then it sinks in, and that's how change happens. And it's slow, that's the reality, but I think that's my theory of change. Yeah. So it's culture shifts, and of course as artists we can play a role. And of course the characters we construct, even if it's not about this topic, the characters we construct shape how we see the world. So imagine Emily in Paris would wear second-hand clothes. And maybe she would work for an environmental agency instead of some phony PR company. I mean, she's a role model. So even there, right? I mean, every artist makes decisions of who his or her characters are.
So, I mean, this makes me think of a question asked by Momoko, which is the attitude that some people have that fine art and theater are relatively elitist and only reach a certain audience. Do we have to get the makers of the Netflix series to tell these stories, or what would be imaginative intersectional ways of bridging the gap?
First of all, I think we need it everywhere. It's not this or that. There is one series on Netflix called Borgen, which I think is a very good example that it can work. But the problem is it's only one, and there are thousands of series. And so the challenge is, we have some good examples at this point from every spectrum of the arts world, from the visual arts, from the performing arts, from literature, from the movies, and so on. The question is, how do we mainstream it? Because right now, this work is still on the fringes.
I remember this, it stayed with me. I mean, also because some students worked it into a work, but the founder of Stability AI, who created Stable Diffusion, in one of the interviews in 20 or 21, he was asked, what would you tell a young entrepreneur? And he said, drop everything and work only on AI. And are you basically saying that's would be our rational choice in relation to climate change?
Well, look, I mean, there are 4 existential risks, and climate is one of them. We still have nuclear, and we still have AI, and we also have the possibility of a virus a deadly virus going out, not corona, but something that really kills. So these are the 4 main existential risks we know of about. And of course, devoting your life to any of them is definitely, I guess, a good idea. But I think there's a difference between climate and the other, especially nuclear and the virus, possibility of a lethal virus, because this is in the hand of a few people, right? Whereas the ecological crisis is in the hands of many more people. So
and it's more definite, right? The virus might happen or might not happen. The change through climate.
It's a collective, right? Whereas
will
with
happen
nuclear,
if we don't do anything. It will happen.
And with nuclear, we have been smart enough for 80 years to not have a nuclear winter, which I'm trying to say something positive here.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah. But this is really only a few people have these buttons, right? The rest of us is just sitting there. We can't do anything. I mean, we didn't know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, how close it was, but it was only in the hand of a few people. Whereas the ecological crisis is something where we can all do something about it. Of course, certain countries and certain people in positions of power can do more, but fundamentally we can all do something about it. I think that's a big difference. And with AI, it's a bit, I mean, still we need a lot of smart people and activists preventing it from going out, but I think it's still a little bit less collective than climate.
I mean, this is also this whole story. We spoke a little bit about it in the last session on the compounding crises and the fact that some of these crises mutually reinforce each other. And of course, the massive deployment of AI contributes to pollution and thereby possibly to the climate crisis, or what you call the ecological crisis. And then there's this story that it will eventually figure it out and we should just invest more, this idea of accelerationism. But a question that I think would be interesting to ask here is what holds back artists from creating such works, and perhaps what holds back institutions from showcasing more of them?
So what holds artists back? I think it's hard because it's hard. It takes a lot of research, and it's not easy as an artist to just call up a scientist and be like, hey, I need some. It's not possible, right? I mean, that's also what I said in the article. There is a barrier in terms of, you know, getting to information beyond what is in the media. And then I think, which is completely understandable, it is overwhelming. Like, why do you want to devote your life to such a depressing cause? I mean, I can only say for myself, having spent many years on it, like, I'm not depressed. I'm absolutely not depressed.
I mean, that leads me to another question by Umiko. What's your advice for current art student? How can we overcome the feeling of being overwhelmed, stuck, having no more agency in this?
I can share what motivates me and why I wouldn't want to do anything else. Because if you really think about the long scale, right, Homo sapiens has been here for 40,000 years. The first 30,000 years were climate purgatory. It was too cold, too hot, too this, too that. We nearly went extinct multiple times, we know that. There was just a few hundred left, and it was like very close with the genes that we just wouldn't survive. And then after 30,000 years of struggle for survival, the Holocene happens, and suddenly we are climatically in a time where actually it's like paradise. I'm sorry I'm using these terms, but it works for this analogy, right? And then what happens? We start to develop language. We start to develop stories, writing, all these amazing things. And most of it happened the last 5,000 years. I mean, writing was developed 5,000 years ago. The first stories were recorded, even though they were told longer, 4,000 years ago. And then we now happen to be on this planet exactly in this moment where we could actually throw ourselves into climate purgatory again after our ancestors have struggled so hard for us to be here like this, right? So it's just our luck to be here now. And so why wouldn't I do what I can to try to tell this story in various ways and yeah, so that's how it's incredible to be alive right now. That's my I think it's incredible that we're here now. And I would love for us to not throw away all the things that we have, that are such a miracle. Yeah.
Thank you. And to come back, and there's a very nice formulation by Sahra. Have you encountered clear resistance or rejection of your kind of work around climate change by what you call gatekeepers in this article? What did these moments reveal to you about the structural challenges of bringing climate-related themes into the art sector?
Yeah, there are plenty of artists who want to work on this, to be honest, but the gatekeepers are not really helping. So, it's more about the leaders of arts institutions who are in something I call the responsibility crisis, who are not really seeing what art could do in this moment of history, who are not getting on board and who are keeping business as usual. So, your chances of making a funding proposal on this topic, getting this funded, it's not high on the agenda of curators. Because they themselves, I don't know why, if they are also in denial or just haven't taken the time to look at the topic. But if you look at the festivals and the programming, the ecological crisis is almost not present. Yeah.
There was, of course, the Vienna Biennial for Change, which now has become the climate... is it Climate Biennial?
Yeah, and I've written the Bilanz for die Presse about it, so I looked at it quite in depth, but even there you could see that it was 2 exhibitions, but it wasn't really supporting artists here to create work on the climate crisis, or, in this case, climate crisis, because we don't have this kind of lab that you're trying to create here, right? That where really artists and scientists work together and then produce work for the Klimabiennale. So that the foundation wasn't there. And another thing was that it was like the performing arts were not there at all. So there were a lot of issues, but I think the fundament, it's also budget-wise, you cannot compare it. If you look at the Wiener Festwochen, they are on for 5 weeks and have a budget of 15 million, and the Klimabiennale was on for 3 months and had 1.5 million. That shows you something about that's a political decision, right? To give just 1.5. So it's nothing compared to what the Wiener Festwochen are getting. That's also an issue.
Or probably the State Opera, for that matter.
Or the State Opera, that is of course true, but at least the State Opera, they also make a lot of money, huh? So you have to say that. But yeah, of course, on that same, but there were structural problems for now. Yeah.
There's one, we're also trying to maybe work out some of the kind of differences in approaches among artists who go about working on these topics. One became clear when you already said that you prefer to speak of the ecological crisis because you lose so many people when you speak of the climate crisis, and it includes biodiversity loss. Oliver Ressler last time said he speaks of the climate breakdown, so actually looking for the term that's a very strong term. But another thing I'm seeing is, and I'd like to insist on that more, is the question that you always bring back the scientist. And in this article, you say there are 4 cornerstones of work that you would wish artists to do, or at least that you try to do, which is commitment to scientific insight, revealing ethical dilemmas, constructive outcomes, and orientation toward action. Whereas, of course, Oliver Ressler's work is not essentially with scientists, it's essentially with activists, it's working himself around ways to communicate some of these issues. But you really always circle back to the science. And are you not, to put it polemically, unnecessarily burdening yourself? The science is simple, everybody can read it up, you can sum it up on one page. Why do you still insist on bringing in the scientists?
Yeah, because as I said before, I see my role more in making visible what is not yet visible, very similar to scientists, right? I mean, they try to find the data and say, okay, this is why this is happening. They shine a light on something we didn't know before, and then I try to take it over and try to shine the light through the human lens on that same issue. So that's my understanding. Partially, probably I'm also like against this act because I'm coming from the classical arts, and the human conditio humana is so present in that tradition. I should also mention these 4 cornerstones you mentioned. This isn't something I came up with. It's something which was actually very hopeful. I reached out to lots of, well, the colleagues that were not that many, but around the world in the theater world. And we kind of compared our works and how we're approaching it and what our core values are. And this is what came out. And it was everyone did the same independently of each other. And then we thought, okay, we're onto something that might be helpful to others. So this is how we ended up.
I mean, the 4, I think I didn't read them all. So commitment to scientific insight is the first, revealing ethical dilemmas is the second, constructive outcomes, and then orientation toward action.
Yeah, the last one is more like that we put in this interactive. I would really say the first 3 are key. The 4th is an option that, yeah, if you put something interactive in and really directly engage an audience, then, yeah, it's a more active form than just having a passive audience. Yeah.
And revealing ethical dilemmas, I was like, why? I mean, why do you need to reveal ethical dilemmas? You can also just say that, you know, that as Oliver Ressler does, that a flight uses as much, you know, CO2 as X or Z, you know, and why do you need the ethical dilemma?
Well, I think, you know, this is how I phrased it 5 years ago, we all evolved, but I mean, in a way, what I was getting at is this translation to what it means for us as humans, because we relate to things when we understand what it means for us. Okay. Right? So this is...
and about revealing the impact.
Yeah, I mean, sea level rise is, okay, sea level rise, but what does it mean for us? Then it becomes meaningful, right? So this is, and then we have ethical dilemmas. And of course, there are a lot of moral questions that these challenge. I mean, this brings out, the ecological crisis brings out. I don't have the answers, but of course, this is why I constructed a future generation to come and ask. Because I think a lot of times we see ourselves as successors, yeah, as Nachfahren. But what if we start thinking of ourselves as ancestors? Right? And indigenous peoples, of course, have had this for a long time, the 7th generation thinking and so on. We in the West have lost it. And so, even with this production,
Can you explain what the 7th generation thinking is? Briefly?
Well, it's that you are acting in a way that you think 7 generations ahead, that you still have a livable planet.
So what the impact would be on 7th generation?
Yeah. Which is still, has always been present for indigenous people. And it's, I think, a very powerful way to think about it, and very helpful. If we start to think of ourselves as ancestors, our perspective changes and our responsibility changes. And that's why I brought the people from the future here to have this conversation. That's how I tackled the ethical dilemma that we're facing now. And I don't want to impose what your conclusions are, but I want to put it on the table so we can think about it in a meaningful way. That's the only thing I'm trying to do there.
One last question on my side before I open it up to the audience. In this article, you make the case that basically science gave us the information, wrote the articles, and yet change didn't happen. Momoko mentions that COP30 was a disappointment in many ways. And what reason do you have to think that art will do better than science? And their second, of course, the second different approach is activism that you mentioned in this article. So you have these 2 approaches that you compare, activism versus art. So what reasons do we have that art will do better than science and activism alone?
Well, like that is the last question, is the important one. I think that, you know, good science, good art, good activism can work very meaningfully together. So in various ways. So for instance, now, just to bring an example from what happens now, the the reason why And to Begin is coming back to Vienna is because a teacher from Teachers for Future, so the teacher branch of Fridays for Future, was in the audience and contacted me the next day and said, every student in Austria should see this work. And I was like, okay, great, how do we do that? But it was from his initiative, and now we built the first pilot project, and we have already over 1,000 students coming to see this in January, and this is just a pilot that can be scaled. So it's actually coming from the Teachers for Future, that they are supporting, so we're working together, right? So they think the story is important, and they are organizing to bring in the students. And that's one way that we can work together meaningfully in a way that we didn't before.
So it's more a kind of common effort than...
Yeah, and what we also saw, I mean, if you just look at science and activism, let's say in 2018, of course, Fridays for Future came and they said, listen to the scientists. And that worked for a while, and it achieved a lot. I think it's forgotten. We tend to forget now that they put this on the front of mainstream media. It was the children on the street, right? And there were a lot of, I mean, they influenced the political agenda. Suddenly there was a green wave. And we have a Green Deal that is now getting watered down, but at least it happened, right? Of course, you can't keep an activist momentum forever. This is also clear. So then now we have different developments, and of course, art is a bit more long-term, right? So we continue the work, and it can be more continuous, whereas movements, they rise and fall. This is the nature of them, and this is not, I mean, this is how it works. So, but I think the art component is coming in now, because 12 years ago, there wasn't as much artistic engagement with the ecological crisis as there is now. And we are sitting here now, and we couldn't have had this conversation 12 years ago.
I wouldn't probably have thought of it yet, yes.
Yeah, so that's, again, I'm trying to be optimistic here. I mean, I've seen change. It feels like now, oh, everything is getting worse, but no, it's just how the wind changes. Now it seems to be more against us, but it will also change again, and a new wave will come. In the meantime, we continue to do the work.
And maybe we can contribute to some drops to that wave through what we do. But are there questions or comments on your side? Yes, do you have a microphone? Yeah. And feel free to briefly introduce yourself if you want to.
Yeah, hello, my name is Olivier Hölzel, and I'm an artist myself, and I think that probably like artists cannot change the world, but the left can change a lot. There has been a lot of discussion about that the MAGA movement in America should actually be the left-wing movement, because they stormed the Capitol, for instance, in the same year like you did your opera. Yeah? It was in 2019, and they stormed the Capitol. And I think also the art scene is a little bit too polite, too comfortable, too static, so I think that's a big point also because of social media. You know, social media has made us very egoistic and not altruistic, not thinking in groups anymore somehow. So it's performance a lot today, you know what I mean? And so the left wing should be like the Madami, you know, the New Yorkian mayor. He used the same language like Trump, but in a left-wing way, and he tried to escape from this too left-wing kind of, you know, protecting everyone, always talking about minorities, which is important, of course, yeah, but he didn't put it first. And so I think also, like, sorry to say that, but I think that guys like Musk or this Charlie, what was his name? I don't know, this English American guy who was always talking and always being right. That I don't know if these guys get shot somehow. I feel like, I mean, they really provoked a lot. Yeah? I don't say that they should get shot, yeah, but I think they're, or for instance, I have another idea. I think that social media should just be smashed in 50 different social medias. Like, so the right-wing guys can just stay amongst each others, you know what I mean? They can just echo chamber between each other, like it used to be, you know, when you had newspapers before, you would buy a right-winged newspaper or a left-winged newspaper, and somehow today there's like a monopoly of opinion. Why is it like that? I mean, you have the Kartellrecht before, which was always taking care of not too much monopoly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. So you're saying, basically, if I can try to phrase a question or a comment based on that, that for you the more important issue is you believe more in politics than in art as contributing to these issues?
I think actionism in Vienna was very radical. You know, it was also with police, and they also did a lot of wrong stuff. Yeah? But they really broke the society somehow. Yeah? And I think that today, when we are artists, we're very depending on social media, and social media is big shit. Yeah, that's what I really believe. Yeah, it's something that makes you behave in a certain way. And somehow, I think if you just smash it up in 50 different social medias.
But this is not really like very connected to or don't I see the connection to the topic at hand, like about art and what art can do in that context? I agree with you on social media. I mean, 100%.
Yeah, but this is the main problem. That's why nothing is happening. You know, that's why things are keep on going. You know, all the time, and it's a lot supported by artists. Also, artists change their kind of behavior and try to adapt a lot to these kind of structures of social media. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Which are totally not altruistic. They are very egoistic. And
but, yeah. I think that's exactly where we can be a, you know, we can balance, I mean, we can work against that, right? So that's why I'm so passionate about theater, where the lights go out, where we still switch, it's one of the last places on the planet where we switch off on our phones, and the lights go off and we pay attention, right? And yeah, it's hard to bring everyone into the theater, but then the people who are there really experience something, we can have a meaningful exchange, their discussions afterwards, and I think...
Yeah, but there should also be a little bit of fuck you or something like that, you know what I mean? Really more this kind of attitude.
That's your choice, if you want to do this.
But think about it, it's just think about it. If you're always moving within a very polite kind of, then you're in something bourgeois a bit, you know?
No, and actually, you know, when people cry when they see a performance, then and that happens, right? So I don't think necessarily, it's not my style. I rather appeal to emotion than getting people angry. You can do that, of course. It's not, everyone can do what they want, but it's not my field,
you know,
my text.
This fuck you is not against the people, it's maybe more to tell the people, look at our system, what has happened. Like, for some very, very, very strange reason, like Trump is a guy who gets people on his side, yeah, for a totally lie. Yeah? It's a total lie. It's a pure illusion. But he gets a lot of people together who are doing really crazy stuff. You know what I mean? And this used to be the power of left-wing politics. Yeah? And it's not existing. Look at Austria and left-wing politics, like in Austria. And it has a lot to do with art, of course. It's totally not out of the context. It's 100% in the same context for me, yeah? Yeah, but
okay, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, in a way, you're pointing towards a different strategy, which, to a certain degree, is a little bit closer to what Oliver Ressler does. But of course, there's a radicality in a certain way of art making that you feel is lacking. And yes, I also, to a degree, I agree with the idea that, unfortunately, in my opinion, the right wing or the extreme right wing has now taken over a discourse of appealing to the people. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are working and analyzing this thing. And I wish, you know, that the FPÖ hadn't, and that's now I'm voicing my aesthetic opinion, hadn't run the best campaign in the last election. But Dein Wille geschehe, that's what the left wing was promising in the past. And now it's... Yes, some people anyway, are able to reclaim the power, but in any case, yeah, that's one strategy that's possible. And I mean, maybe...
What has really gone wrong in the US, is that the ecological crisis. Well, wait, I haven't finished my sentence.
Well, yeah, maybe we can listen to each other.
Yeah. So what has really gone wrong in the US is that the climate crisis is now a left issue. So if you are on the right, you don't believe, I mean, it's not a belief system, yeah, but you don't believe in climate change. From the left, you listen to the science, right? And this is, of course, very, very tragic. I think that in Europe, we have managed to not go down that road yet, and that's why, for me, it's very important to not label the ecological crisis as a right or a left issue. It's a question of the survival of the human species, and that means all of us. And so I always try to stay away from left or right wing in this topic. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for me, this, yeah, it's. I mean, the bottom line is it's different strategies. The fuck you strategy also alienates a lot of people, and a lot of people won't listen once you've said fuck you. So it's a cost. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah.
Sorry to say that in Europe, it's not like in the US. That's a big lie.
I mean,
France, right now they have a lame duck president, and Le Pen is already standing in front. So it's gonna be, you know what I mean?
Is that the piece or what?
Yeah, he needs the code for the left one.
What's it? The code. Yeah. Okay, the code for the. Yeah, I mean, we have definitely a lot of problems, but the question on which we can agree to disagree, if that's okay with you, is that the question on which we can agree to disagree is what is the most efficient strategy. Gloria suggests that it's more efficient not to alienate one part of the population by making issues left-wing, purely left-wing and purely right-wing. Some other people think, no, we have to wake people up through saying, you know, fuck you to a certain system. And both are, I think, strategies that exist. And yeah, and each artist has to choose based on their own, let's say, sensitivity and belief which strategy they want to follow. But yeah, thank you for bringing up this kind of radical point. 3 more questions?
Yeah, 3 more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I wish to connect somehow to his statement, because at first he said that art will not change the world. And it was always a personal topic for me, because I got into art very late, with 30 years, and I came from a scientific background. So in my first life, I wanted to change the world, like everybody, you know, like science and politics. And then I got engaged in art. And in art, I learned that I cannot change anything in the world with art. I can only change myself. And this was the intention that I had and the hope that I have for art, you know, to get myself in order, yeah, to make my own emotional landscape in order. And this, I think, is the only thing that how art can change the world. It changed the people who are doing art, and I see the current development as everybody nowadays want to be an artist, because they don't have to fight like our parents for money anymore, and they don't want to sacrifice their life for money anymore, the young people, you know. And then you are confronted with the question, what are you willing to do with your life if you're not want to fight for money? So, and this is what artists do, you know. And if more people think like this, I think the world will change by itself, not by activism, not by politics, but by people who are changing their personal life somehow.
Thank you.
And it's not a coincidence that the artificial intelligence discussion and the work discussion, like the bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen, is discussed right now, because in the future AI and robotics will do all the shitty jobs that we are forced to do in the past. They will do for us, So we have more time to live like artists, or to ask ourselves, what is the sense of all this shit that I'm doing the whole day? Yeah? And if we have a solution for this, things like climate change, maybe nuclear warfare, will get solved by itself, you know? That there are not so many people who are fighting for the power to change the world, you know, for everybody, like dictators or so. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the question of whether art can change people or whether practicing art can only change yourself. There's one article by Arthur Danto, it's called The Disenfranchisement of Art by Philosophy. And the article starts by saying it has always been repeated throughout history that art does nothing. And yet, when a dictator rises to power, one of the first things they do is to forbid the critical artworks. So there seems to be some kind of paradox in that, right? Either they get it all wrong, or art does more than, you know, we think when we're at our most, let's say, self-critical. And yeah,
I think it depends on what you mean by art changing the world. Of course, the stories we tell change our worldviews and therefore, or shape how we see the world, and therefore the actions that we take. So maybe, you know, it's not direct but indirect. Yes, of course, the stories we tell will shape how we see the world. And in good and bad ways, right? I mean, there have been stories that have caused a lot of damage in the world as well. So this is always, but there is power in it.
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that artworks can change the world. It's only artists who can change the world. If you show your work to some audience, which is very not artistic thinking, they don't understand it, and it will not change their lives. You know?
Well,
that's why entertainment nowadays is much more powerful than art, because people are watching a lot of movies, you know.
I would disagree. It depends on how accessible you make it. I mean, I just know for And to Begin, there were, yeah, I mean, but that's, in my world.
Can you compete with Netflix? I mean, no.
So, in my world, good art is accessible. I mean, I can just say for And to Begin, there were people in the audience, because I spoke to them afterwards. I was very curious who was there, and there were people who were not particularly, didn't have particular affinity to science, had never been to the theater, but they heard that the future generation is coming, and they were very curious, and they came. So, I mean, I made a plot, right? If you make a plot that sort of somehow triggers curiosity, you can get out of the usual crowd. But that's your challenge as an artist.
People in their everyday life, not on weekend, you know, not 2 hours on Saturday. It will not change anything.
Of course, it was Monday night.
Yeah, okay.
You were there. It was Monday night.
Yeah, no, but
yeah.
it is true. I mean, there's definitely a question of accessibility, and I'm happy that you both raised that issue, because, of course, I think we haven't been very good at accessibility in contemporary art, and we haven't very good at hospitality, making people feel welcome in art spaces by the language we speak. That's often very prohibitive, very exclusive. And where works are charged with a surplus of value by speaking in complicated words and so on. I mean, there's a lot of issues, so I think that's one point where you both meet. And then the question is, what do you try to put in place to make things more accessible? Can you make it accessible without dumbing it down? Can you be, as you said, faithful to the science and be accessible? I mean, these are all complicated questions, and then the question is also relating to what you said. Why is there no art on Netflix? Maybe there is, you know, it depends on your concept of art, whether you consider that some of these things that are on Netflix are actually art, just maybe popular art or not elitist art, or so, yeah, so in the end, I think it's also about questioning perhaps what we want to call art, and try to get these kind of messages everywhere. And again, I mean, I said it last time, but I'll say it again. We're focusing now on the climate crisis, and there's good reasons to do so. But when we started discussing in the seminar, we also spoke about social media as being one crisis, and crisis linked to technologies as being one type of crisis, political crisis as being a second type, and then social crises as a third type. And the environmental crisis was one of the four kind of fields of crises that we identified. And so yes, we need all hands on deck. As Al Gore said in this moment that was important to you, but of course we all have to choose our combats as well. And maybe we're better at our combats if we choose a specific combat and try to really be good at it, and do it in a way that corresponds to our feeling of authenticity, our feeling of how we want to speak to an audience, how we want to relate to the world, and what we think is most urgent right now. But I think there was another...
There are five more
5, wow.
people, at least
there's
5
a lot
I
of...
want to say. So should we do something like in time, like short comments or collect or...
Just succinct questions, but I prefer to have them separately because
yes.
I have to be honest, the first question I keep forgetting then and
yes,
will not be fair.
Yeah, so maybe just keep it a bit short to give the others.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for these insights into your artistic practice. I actually have 2 questions that point to slightly different directions, but first is from what I gather from your account of your practice is that it's a deeply dialogical practice. Dialogical in the double sense that you're in conversation with the people that attend your performances, and that there's a breakdown of the fourth wall with kind of a real intention of entering into a conversation and creating a situation in which the voices that speak are being heard. But there's also a second dialogical part, and that seems to be the dialogue with the sciences. And as we all know, science is complicated. We might agree on certain general lines, but scientists also differ on many things. Not necessarily in the sense that there is climate denial, or but scientists differ, methods differ. Science is really complex, and I'm quite sure that the scientists you're in conversation with also have their own thoughts on many things that you're doing. And I was really interested in learning a bit more on how you're actually engaging with them. I mean, working at YASA, what is the practice of bringing the artists to the sciences or to the scientists, and what do they think is necessary? Are there perhaps conflicts of goals where you're not exactly aligned? What are their ideas for how an artistic practice should look like versus yours? So this is, I think, my first question. And the second one would go to kind of the core of your doing this as a practice in the performative arts. When I was struck that you're framing it so strongly through narrative, of course, ballet is telling stories through movements, but it's also doing many other things, right? So I was wondering how this intermedial aspect or this intercalcation of different art forms is perhaps also something that is working against this smooth subordination of artistic moments to narrative, or to use kind of the Lukácsian terms, yeah, erzählen versus beschreiben. There is something for the detail that's not part of the story there. And I wonder to what extent this also holds true for this assemblage of different art forms you're bringing together in your practice.
Okay. So the first question with the engagement with the scientists, yeah, there was some skepticism at the beginning. Why do we as a science institute now have an artist? I mean, not everybody was excited. There was, maybe that's also why I kind of always, I'm very particular about distinguishing myself from activism, because this was a big fear they had, that I would create work that ends up being dogmatic, being political, being things that they as a scientist by nature cannot, I mean, practice. And that's, I think, why also there has been this very deep, long conversations, and yeah, deep conversations about that I really want to make visible. They are uncovering one part, what is happening, and then I'm trying to uncover in the other side what it means. So this is why I think hundreds of hours and dozens of scientists have contributed for me to come up with this conclusion. And once they started seeing it, they were really happy. And they were crying, which I was very happy about when they saw the work, and they actually were very touched. So the second question about how to connect this to the classical arts. So I think one thing I learned is that, and this I think goes for all arts, it's a very complex problem to tackle the ecological crisis, and one art form by itself is going to have a very hard time doing it. So for the dance pieces, I usually have a narrator who says something and then something happens. So there's a thread, but there's always language, or there's something on the screen, there's an installation. I mean, it's usually a three-dimensional. There's the artist on stage, the story being told in some form, and then some video installation. Dance by itself wouldn't be able to tackle it, but together with other art forms, it can. And to the other, it's also possible to bring in dance in its pure form, which is what happens in End to Begin, where at the end of each act or in the middle of it, when something happens which is just, when there's a lot to digest at some point in this plot, actually the dancers come in and they're masters of ceremony from the future, and they are trying to express what cannot be put into words. And it's mainly a theater piece, but then it's very unexpected that the dancers come in, and afterwards the audience told me this was the most surprising, but also a very beautiful way to bring in the power of dance without it actually being, like, it's not in direct interaction with the theater play, but in response, to give people a moment to just digest what happened. So these are two ways that I'm doing it, which is, of course, there can be other ways, but that's ways that I found to do it effectively.
That's, by the way, an interesting aspect. I mean, when we're talking about tactics or strategies, and I always try to extract these, is the fact that if something constantly runs, you can't really connect. I feel you can't connect it so well to yourself. So I also felt that these moments were really important, where you don't get input. You know, if a piece gives you input, a movie gives you input for 1.5 hours, you can have intense emotions, but you're not going to become self-reflective. The movies that make you self-reflective are the one where someone stands by a window for 2 minutes and looks out, because that's the moment where you don't need to digest something they try to convey to you. And so, and of course, music traditionally, and I think maybe this counts also for dance, and I've always felt that maybe I'm not a very good audience because I can't stay focused, neither on listening to the music. I always drift away, but this drifting away can also be positive. At least I felt that in your piece, it's what made me connect what was happening to my own life, and like starting to think about my 2.5-year-old daughter in 25 years, and what will she think of me, and won't she say, what, in 25 you took a plane to Paris? You knew, right? I mean, is that not what she will say? And this was something I thought, right? A personal thought. And if there hadn't been space, this connection to myself wouldn't have happened. So, okay, but this then at worst, if we're polemical, and we could say, okay, so the dance is basically the moment to think yourself.
In this piece, yeah. So, but I always start with the idea and what I want to say, and then I think which is the which is the best art form. So sometimes it's theater, and then it's like even End to Begin has an opera singer at some moment, right? Because I suddenly felt we need a voice that gives you these goosebumps. So I mean, that's how I try to do it. That first I think about what I want to do, and then is it dance? Is it theater? Is it music? Typically, everyone is together in doing this. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we can still make it happen.
I mean, but maybe let's
finish
this first. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm also from Klaus's course. I didn't write the question in our group because before we were talking about writing questions, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to ask it, but it came up in the discussion, and I wanted to talk about Fridays for Future specifically, because to me, Fridays for Future was a truly radicalizing moment. I was about 15 or 16, and to me, really, also now in the talk, you talked about, oh, now you can at least start talking about climate, and you can start working as an artist with Fridays for Future, for example, more. But I think it's because Fridays for Future has been kind of eroded from a really progressive, youth-driven movement to, well, I think a election campaign for the Greens, and afterwards a really discouraging development in the politics of these Green parties. And I think a lot of people, I mean, you see it, you know, Greta Thunberg, she is denounced by Fridays for Future now. And she is, I would say, with her political standing right now, even though it's very controversial, way more popular with the youth than Fridays for Future. And yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask. That's kind of, I was thinking, okay, maybe the text we read was maybe 2022, okay, a lot of things happened, but it was still a part of the discussion today, and I think we really have to think about going to a more, you know, active and growing movement rather than one that is actively shrinking and becoming something that, yeah, I wouldn't want to be a part of. And another question, because it was asked twice, I think really theater, I work in theater as well. I don't work as a director or anything, but just as someone in the wardrobe. And I see the people going in and out of the theater I work in. It's a very small stage performance dance theater. And I see these people, and it's really, I hang their coats up and I see they don't have marks in them. Obviously, they're very expensive. And I think the question, if theater specifically is a very elitist field in the arts, is an important one. And I think it hasn't really been answered in this discussion yet.
So just to thank you so much, Gabriel, for sharing also the kind of first, somewhat it resonates a bit with this idea that the radicality has been lost, and you liked the radicality, and that's what made you vibe with Fridays for Future. But the second question, the elitist, did you mean to say that it's just something to be talked about, or something that's positive because it then speaks to the elites, or how do you, what does it mean, the fact that it's a relatively elitist?
I think it's just an echo chamber for elites. I don't see, even though we in our theater, we have a dynamic pricing scheme, but still it's just the rich people that show up. I barely see someone who doesn't come to our theater like every other weekend. I rarely see new people. And this is, I think, a really bad sign for the arts in general, because if you don't bring new people, then you will not change the world. You know, this is when I think it happens that art doesn't change anything anymore, and the only thing you can do is change maybe a little part of yourself. But I don't want this, you know, I want the art to be accessible. And I don't think we will have open theater like in the system we currently live in, because to me, I am really a big theater nerd in some respect, but for an art student at least. But for me, the most inspiring thing is the Moscow Kunst, which truly managed to open the gates to a lot of people. And Stanislavski's method in acting is a very renowned theory that revolutionized theater in many respects, and at the same time opened the gates to working people to just enjoy the arts. and they were not too stupid to understand these very difficult plays. They were there to enjoy it. And I think, yeah, that's the point I was trying to make. I don't know, I was talking a lot.
Thank you for developing, but do you have thoughts on this?
I mean, about the elitist part, yeah, I think this is a crisis of the art system. I agree with you, it wouldn't have to be that way. I mean, I'm trying to do my part to work against it. So for instance, when this teacher contacted me the day after the premiere, I was like, okay, we're going to do this because I saw the potential. If we're going to get school classes from all kinds of schools, yeah, from children who have never been to the theater before, and from very diverse backgrounds, there is a chance there, and that's why I stuck to it. I went fundraising outside of the system, and I worked on it for months because I think this is the kind of contribution I can make as a theater maker. Of course, I would have liked to just write the next play, but I think right now there's the opportunity, and then we take it, right? And even for the open performance, I try to really get the information out to non-theater audiences, beyond the converted crowd. Of course, it's hard, but I think it's up to us in the theater world to open up the theater we can, if we're determined and stubborn in a good way.
This also means, I mean, that there is place for initiatives that make things more accessible. So it's not just the contents. I mean, now we think of ourselves as basically content creators and making our content accessible. I was recently in Luxembourg and I met one of the person running the Kulturpass, where you can basically go to the theater for €3 or go to the opera or to ballet. And he said, like, mostly people still don't feel like it's for them, and that it's really essential for the feeling of Zugehörigkeit, yeah, of being part of the community. And he spoke about his first week in work where a woman came for one of these Kulturpass tickets and she said, "Mir will doch bloß dazugehören," more or less in Luxembourgish. We just want to be part of it, because it's to be part of society, to be able to, go to these places. And so these kind of initiatives, which, I mean, we don't necessarily look down on, but there is a certain kind of disregard for mediation, and it's changing, fortunately, a little bit. But, I've heard curators of Steirischer Herbst say, well, the mediation, like the children animation club, right? To be very honest, there's a lot of snobism around making things accessible, and I think there's also place for change of mentalities and for the creation of initiatives which make people feel welcome. That's why I also spoke about hospitality, and make people feel that we speak the language, that they understand, that no one looks down at them, that the person at the cash desk, he said, well, if the person at the cash desk has to call their superior to know if the Kulturpass is accepted, it's an échec for the person who comes. It's a failure for the person who came, and they dared once to come there, they will not come again because they saw the public shame of everybody behind them while they asked for a ticket that wasn't sure that it would be available. So there's a lot of these things that I think connect to that beyond the content of what we create. Yeah.
Hello, yeah. My question, I was thinking this is really interesting also. I also study theater studies also, and we recently also had a talk with the curator. He did a lot of theaters in Italy, also in England, and his point was more of like showing the stories of the people so that those people, or, I'm saying those people, but the people you want to share it with also feel kind of talked to. So that's more of his solution, which could be your answer maybe, or one of your answers. But what I wanted to ask was, what would be something you'd like to add or change, or in your future performances or performance art, is there something you're really interested in, I don't know, adapting, or kind of what's the future looking like for your performances?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on something new that I can't give away yet, but yeah, I'm trying to create a format that could be spread more. So I'm working on something that can be a theater play. It's probably going to be 2 actors, 2 dancers, 2 musicians in its stage form. but there is a version of it which can be a radio play, which can be read in schools, which can be, you know, if you have the radio, you reach more people. If you make it accessible to schools, they can read it in school and talk about it. So yeah, that's my next goal. So there will be a full-fledged theater version, but then, yeah, find formats that can be more easily and widely spread. I still believe in theater. It's very expensive to make theater comparatively, right? But I think the experience is important, and for some people, I think it's important to have it, but it would be even more ideal to have a version that can be spread more easily. So that much I can give away.
Also an interesting strategy and approach. Was there another question? Two more.
Okay. So can we have some art, maybe still?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, yeah. Yeah.
Hello, ich heiße Maria. My name is Maria, and I'm also an artist. Since you are working on this, as I understood, this interdisciplinary area, which for me is very controversial. I mean, this rational approach of the science and the emotional approach of the choreographer or a dancer. It's very interesting. So I would like just to ask you, what is your goal? Like, how do you see, imagine what you're like fighting for, working for succeeds. How will the world looks like? Oh, yeah, thank you.
I think there would be a lot of stories and visions about a positive future that help us move forward in a positive way. So it's not me changing the world, but lots of people creating and grappling with these challenges and creating new approaches of thinking ourselves out of where we are now. And all these collective visions and positive stories, constructive stories as I call them, then actually help us move out of this bottleneck where we are. Is that a satisfying answer?
Not really. I just wanted to know your vision and how does a successful
okay.
world looks like? How is everyday life? How's the economical system? How does it work?
Okay, so it would, the inequalities would be gone because there's enough in the world for everybody. There would be no food shortages because there's enough food for everybody. Yeah, it would be a world where everyone is equal. I mean, I think this is all written in the human rights agenda, for instance, that you know, everyone is equal and has the same rights and the same. This, of course, is still the utopia that is connected to the current crisis as well. Because if we didn't have these inequalities, then so many, these few rich people couldn't cause such big damages. So I think there's nothing new there.
Okay, so there's one last thing we can show. It also connects to the question of audience, because when I heard you speak, Gabriel, that's why I asked again, and you spoke about these people that are part of the elites. I wasn't sure whether you were saying, well, we need to speak to them because they are calling the shots right now, right? Because we don't live in this world of equality. And for me, this connected a little bit to part of your practice, which has developed not so much at the Festwochen, but in political spaces and in spaces of discussion where so-called decision makers came together and where you tried to bring in a different voice. At the Forum Alpbach, and in this case, you were invited to Osaka for the expo to re-perform that piece. By the way, the performers are here, or some of them are here in the audience as well. And so with the aim of making an impact on people who have maybe more power than most people to make an impact. Is that also part of it? And yeah, maybe tell us a little more before we see it, but yeah, so that's...
Just, I'm sorry to do this right now. I will answer your question, but I have to re-answer your question because it wasn't complete. So how I see it, we would just simply live with the resources we have and leave enough for the next generation. So this is also part of the utopia. It's the equality, but of course it's being able to live with the resources that we have, and there are enough of them, right? And it's a world where we look back and we say, oh my God, how stupid were we with these fossil fuels? I mean, they weren't good for anyone. They created inequalities. They were bad for people's health. They were bad for everything. And we have renewable energy. Of course, it's not easy to have the transition, but of course, my utopia is in 50 years, we would look back and say, okay, at some point we made a wrong turn and we went down this whole resource extraction model, but eventually we corrected course. So, yeah. No, not just technology, but of course also behavior change, consuming less is part of, it's not, we need both, right? Yeah, I mean, values change, you know, the being together instead of sitting in front of social media is part of it. I mean, yeah, our values change, human interaction, spending quality time together instead of buying things. I mean, this is not so new. This is what has been said for a long time, of course. Yeah, that's part of my utopia. But I would imagine that we look back at how we have done things for the last 80 years and we will go down in history like, oh, they had some really bad ideas, but then they realized that they can change course. That would be. Okay, sorry, but I just thought.
Yeah, of course.
Because, yeah.
It will stay.
Yeah, so to Osaka, so the reason why I thought that might be good to conclude with, to see some art, because we talked a lot about art, is that the European Union had a presence at the World Expo this year, and they decided to have a concert, a European concert on Europe Day, both also commemorating 80 years of the end of World War II. And they chose 4 artists to contribute work. And mine was chosen because they wanted to have something on the ecological crisis, and then they picked one on AI, and yeah, the European Youth Orchestra was there, some members. Yeah, so I think it's also, we talked a lot about the theater and how close it is, but of course we as artists can also go outside, right? And put our work into spaces where it might not be expected, and that's why I also really believe in putting it on political stages, and sometimes having people in the audience who are decision makers can also make an impact. And so this is an example, and it was particularly, it was tricky also from a diplomacy perspective, because like, how do you go out in the world on behalf of the European Union and talk about the ecological crisis in a constructive way? Right? Not greenwashing and saying we are the great Europeans with the Green Deal, which is getting greenwashed at the moment as we are there. But how do we go out and have an honest and authentic conversation with an audience in another part of the world? So not so easy. And the work that I picked is Breath. It's 27 minutes. You see some excerpts now. Fortunately, you also hear a little bit about me talking. I think I've said enough, but I think it's still worth seeing, because it's this dialogue with the diplomat and how I really tried to bring an authentic, honest conversation about this crisis into the room that, yeah, that somehow brings us also in a good conversation with people in the other parts of the world about this crisis.
So art as a Trojan horse to bring in things that couldn't be diplomatically.
I think it's another example where maybe we can do something that you know, politicians sitting on that stage talking about the ecological crisis, they would have to sell something, right? Scientists going on that stage saying something, we've seen it before, the facts don't stick, right? So it was. They trusted us to do it, which, you know, wasn't a small thing to say we want artists to take the stage.
Okay, let's see what you did with it.
So we have to work even harder together to not do that. So I think this is what artists can do now. And I think if you had now heard a lecture from a scientist about the history and the importance of breathing, maybe you would know more, but probably you wouldn't have been moved, and you might not think about it tomorrow anymore. So I hope today you were moved, and I think this is why it's so important that we work together with scientists, with policymakers, to remind ourselves of our common humanity, and to have this emotion, because emotion in the end is the prerequisite for action.
Still, everything evolution discovered was working because carbon dioxide is not an enemy. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are equally important partners for inhaling and exhaling, for yin and yang. Gaia enjoyed a global balance. Animals inhaled oxygen and exhaled carbon dioxide. Plants inhaled carbon dioxide and exhaled oxygen. All was fine, even with those humans around for hundreds of thousands of years, until industrialized greed started to tip the balance. Fever should even up the earth, unleashing demons of the deep.
タオイズムみたいな、なんか東洋思想みたいなものも入ってたと思うんですけど、もしもヨーロッパの皆さんが、日本だったり東洋の人々にこれから期待していることなんかがあったら聞いてみたいです。
I thought there were a lot of commonalities with Taoism and Oriental philosophy in the performance. I'm wondering what kind of relationship you find in the Oriental thoughts and ideologies and European ones.
Yeah, what I found fascinating was when I did the research for the pieces that actually before there was science and medicine, reading was a medicine. And it was much more pronounced in the East, so in this region. And I think that is still true today. I think in the Western culture we have forgotten how to breathe. And actually now through yoga it's coming back also into the West to have more consciousness of breathing. So it was a strange coincidence because 4 years ago when I made the piece and did the research, I didn't realize I would actually come east to bring it to where a lot of the knowledge that I gathered for the work actually originated.
I would like to underline how we're seeing in this piece, and thank you for the question you asked, how the cross-fertilization of cultures is the key to shape this regenerative future. The mixing of knowledge is fundamental for that, and now the West is looking so much at the East, at the spiritual vision of life, which goes beyond the pure science. So as you were saying in your piece, science as the details, but without the heart, without the spirit, we will never understand the whole story. And this is why we need to meet each other and create, co-create the future together. That really strikes me in your work is that there is a lot of sadness and difficulty, but then there is a message of hope and this message of regeneration. And we think that artists, and especially young artists, can reshape, can contribute to reshape and regenerate our future, because this is what the European Union would like to happen in the world. A global regeneration and to create a more inclusive and prosperous, abundant society for all.
Regeneration is possible, it's a biological phenomenon. And I would like to share something that I noticed just a few days ago, which also made me hopeful. Today, we commemorate 80 years since the end of World War II. And in this cast, you had a French dancer, you had a dancer who was half German and half Polish, and you had a dancer who was born in Austria to Serbian parents. So we never thought about it, that the nations that all the cast comes from was at war with each other in World War I, in World War II. And I think that our grandparents couldn't have dreamt that their grandchildren will come to Japan as a Team Europe, just like this 8 years later. So there's regeneration biologically, but also socially. We can heal wounds faster than we think sometimes.
Thank you. Applause also for the dancers. Okay, shall we end it here? And then we continue maybe the discussion with a glass of wine or beer or a toast. Thank you so much for all coming and sharing your insights with passion and sharing your hopes and demands of art. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your own journey with us. And I'm looking forward to the next session, which happens in January with Ines Dujak, with Daria Litivenko, who's Ukrainian, and with Jürgen Münzer, and it's going to be more about doing art in times of burning war. So it's really around how do you work when your country, like Ukraine, is burning. And Ines Dujak, who was my initial guest for this session, wished to invite also these two other artists who had just done a project in Ukraine, just came back a few months ago to talk about their experience of what they felt art was doing there for people who were in the middle of a war. So please come back. Hopefully it's happening on the 19th of January, again at 7 on a Monday. And then we'll see what we do next semester, but that's it for now. Thanks again.
Oh yeah, and if you need some reading, this would be my recommended climate fiction reading.
Yeah. And of course, go see and participate in the piece. I hope to come back to see it again, also in January.